Senta no fundo.
Você na escola, ninguém quer sentar na frente. Não tem pergunta, não. Não tem pergunta. Não tem teste, não.
Fazer assim, o que você gostaria de mais aulas?
Só quando matasse.
Aqui dá pra comer.
Vai ter pergunta, não vai ter crítica. Bom. Por que eu deixo meu telefone pro WhatsApp?
Com a Carol.
Carol. Depois eu te passo, Carol.
Vai você pra nossa.
Não, tô vendo ali o RSVP no WhatsApp.
That's okay.
Pode perder. Sou parte do grupo.
Well, welcome everyone, and as we were saying here, we have a Easter lunch today after our talk. So at 12 we'll have our passes, and then we'll rearrange everything and then have some lunch here in the space. Thanks for everyone who brought some delicious food. It smells really good. I know I'm the one in between you guys and the food, so I'll try to do my best here. Speed up. Great. So to start off, I'm going to read a passage from the book Living Spring by Francisco Xavier, through the Spirit Emmanuel, and it is text 127, and it talks about when Jesus was presented by Pilate right before his crucifixion. And it's titled Royal Humanity. And Pilatus said, "Behold the man." And then Emmanuel brings this interpretation here, saying that in presenting Christ to the crowd, Pilatus did not designate him as an earthly conqueror. No banquet, no purple, no applause, no flowers. Jesus was facing death. A week of terrible suffering was about to end. Betrayed, he had not rebelled. Arrested, he had practiced patience. Humiliated, he had not retorted. Forgotten, he had not been indignant. Tried, he had forgiven. Whipped, he forgot the offense. Victimized by injustice, he did not defend himself. Condemned to martyrdom, he was able to forgive. Crucified, he would soon return to join the same disciples and beneficiaries that had abandoned him, renewing their hopes. However, showing him to the people, Pilatus did not say, "Behold the criminal," or "Behold the victim." He simply said, "Behold the man." Apparently defeated, the Master appeared in full spiritual grandeur, revealing the highest standard for human dignity. Therefore, as we recall this passage, let us remember that only by following the moral lines of Christ will we ever attain royal humanity. So let us join our thoughts, our feelings, our energy through prayer. Elevating our thoughts to Master Jesus, this Spirit that taught us about humility, renunciation, resignation, love, and forgiveness. Christ, we ask you that you help us with our conversation today, inspiring us all to think, reflect, share, and grow together. We thank our Lord for the opportunity to be here, to have this group, this fraternal group, And in communion, may we find your solace, your peace, and your love. So be it. Thank you. So, FSS will be closed during Easter because it's a holiday, so we close it. That's why I decided to talk about Easter today. And I was thinking about, like, throughout the week, the image of Christ being crucified kept coming to me, especially what he says towards the very end when he says, Father, forgive everyone because they don't know what they're doing. So that kept coming back and coming back. So that's what inspired me to talk about Easter and to talk a little bit about the crucifixion and what happened there. So, thinking about Easter, what do you guys, and it's a little early for people to start talking, it's only the first slide, but what do you guys think about Easter when we're approaching Easter? What do you think it means to Christianity, to ourselves, or even before Christ? You guys? Chocolate, yeah. That is true. That is true. Some good chocolate. In a way, a celebration.
I think. Oh.
Yeah, please.
No. Well, I think for me, like, gratitude for the opportunity of a new beginning. You know, sort of like starting fresh. We can have that every day, but it's just like another reminder. Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. And Easter dates back before Christ. And Easter dates back before Christ. It wasn't a holiday that was created for Christianity. It came before. And one of the main reasons, one of the main interpretations is a celebration that happened when the Hebrews, the Jews, were freed from slavery from Egypt and then traveled through the desert up to where today is Israel and Palestine. So Easter, back in the day, was a celebration of freedom. It was a celebration to recognize all the hardship that the slaves had to go through, and also, once they were freed, going through the desert, that journey that they had to endure to basically find a new home and then settle in and create their communities. So that was and still is, a celebration for the Jews. Again, reminding, celebrating all those that were freed. So it has to do a lot with freedom. And in a way, like Lou was saying, to us as well, it has some, I guess, a taste of renewal, a taste of a new beginning. And so if we were to now think about, after Christ, so what before Easter, or for the Jews, Easter has to do with the freedom, or for the freeing of slaves. But how about for Christ here? Because he was, especially according to the Catholic calendar, Good Friday is when he was crucified, and Easter is when he rose again, or resurrected. Yes. So, can we find the same connotation of freedom that this celebration started with the Jews? Can we find also a connotation of freedom through what Christ came to give us, came to show us? What do you guys think? Can we make a connection between what Christ came to show us and freedom as well?
I think in terms of freedom, I think about reincarnation. So if you think about you're getting a second chance as a second life, and
all the other lives. It's freedom. It's a way to think about forgiveness from God, that we made mistakes, and then He's gonna give us other chances to make it right.
Good. Thank you. Thanks, Kara. And that's actually leads up to exactly the connection that we wanted to make. It was, this would have been on Good Friday, but also, around Easter, when again Christ had endured all that journey during crucifixion, and then towards the very end, the strength that he had to say a few words, the words that he said, looking at everyone who was persecuting them, attacking him, had betrayed him, everything all the strength that he had to say a few words, these were the words that he chose to say. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And this spoke really deeply because it talks about forgiveness. So the last words that he decided to say while he was still alive was around forgiveness. That was like his last teaching. He certainly resurrected afterwards, but as a living body, this was the last words that he said. So again, inviting us for forgiveness. And then thinking about, okay, so how can we link this? How can we link forgiveness to freedom, which is let's say the connotation around Easter? And I would say it's actually quite obvious if we were to think about every time when we finally forgive, let's say someone did something to us, when we finally are able to forgive them, the first thing that we feel is the freedom, right? It's that peace that comes, right? That weight, we're no longer carrying that weight on our shoulders. So to me, that was the connection between what Christ said in his last words and freedom. It's how we can find freedom in forgiveness. So, thinking about maybe a tough relationship that we might have with someone, when we finally are able to forgive them, we can feel that weight being lifted. And the same goes with ourselves. So, especially when it comes to guilt, right? We have a tough relationship with guilt that seem to drag us down, seem to hold us hostages. And then whenever we can forgive ourselves for what we did in the past, whenever we can dissolve that guilt, that again brings us that feeling of freedom. Danielle is not here, but one time she said something about the relationship between mothers and guilt, how that it can be very present, and so the idea of forgiving ourselves, because especially when you're working with the kid, not working with the kid, but raising a child, right? You're always questioning your actions from before, right? Oh, maybe I should have done it differently. What have I like the actions that I had with my kid? How is that going to impact their development and their thoughts? And it always comes sometimes with a little bit of guilt. So again, the idea of forgiveness here can certainly set us free, especially for parents. It seems to be a recurring theme that we get. And so today we'll go through a couple examples of forgiveness that we can learn from Christ and from his apostles. Two of them, actually. Welcome.
If I could just add one
Yes,
thing.
please.
I think when you're talking about forgiveness and freedom, because when we're not forgiving, we're sort of in an endless loop of, like, we have these shackles, these punitive shackles, right? Either we're punishing someone else or we're punishing ourselves. and yeah, it just doesn't. Nothing else
Yeah.
nothing else flows. Nothing else opens when that happens.
That's
Right?
our own imprisonment. in a way,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Thank you. And so I started thinking, okay, what does Emmanuel, the spirit guide of Shikashavya, did he say anything about this passage from Luke? And there's this book. It's called Evangelho Segundo Lucas by Emmanuel. So Emmanuel, he wrote a lot of texts through the mediumship of Shikashavya. And then Feb compiled, I believe, 6 or 7 books. And for every gospel, so this one is Gospel of Luke, for every gospel, this book has all the texts that Emmanuel wrote about the Gospel of Luke. So I pulled up this passage here, and Emmanuel wrote 5 or 6 texts about this passage alone, and which is a really good reference when we're creating these talks. And one of them that he wrote one called Forgiveness, the Holy Medicine, since we're talking about forgiveness. And it wasn't, he didn't write for a book, he actually wrote for a magazine. It's called Reformador, which is a monthly magazine for almost 200 years now. No, sorry. 160 or so. And he wrote a text in 1959 about forgiveness. And so we're going to learn a little bit from what Emmanuel says about forgiveness. And then we can hopefully reflect about ourselves here. He says that forgiveness is a holy medicine for the euphoria of the mind and the daily struggle. So a lot of the struggles that we go through is to what Luciana was talking about, is that the shackles, in a way, that we keep as a loop in our minds sometimes around guilt. He says that just as you should not keep debris and infection in the organic vessel, do not keep aversion and resentment in your soul. So aversion and resentment, especially when talking about other people, right? That it's like an infection to our own soul. He goes on to say, forgive those who upset you, forgive those who hurt you. Forgive now, forgive today, forgive tomorrow, forgive unconditionally. And this is really interesting, because the minute we think about forgiveness being unconditional, we start thinking about the times when someone wronged us, someone did something to us, and we think, well, I'll forgive them if they do something, you know, if they pay me back, or if they come and apologize, or if and if and if. The minute we put conditions to forgiveness, that's no longer forgiveness.
I'm going to forgive Oliver, but I don't talk to him anymore.
Right? Exactly. So as soon as we put a condition to forgiveness, it's no longer forgiveness. Right? And so he keeps on saying, remember that all creatures bring with them the imperfections and weaknesses that are peculiar to them. The same for us, right? Just as even as misfits, we also bring ours. Right? So it talks about who are we to say that no, you should not be forgiven because you did something to me. Who are we to do that, since we also carry our own imperfections and weaknesses? And then he says, this is why the divine emissary, crucified by gratuitous persecution. Gratuitous is like unwarranted or wrong persecution. Prayed to God before his own executioners. Father, forgive them because they do not know what they're doing. So you can see how Christ was in a different, another level. Like Christ wasn't trying to forgive those who had wronged him or who persecuted him or who betrayed him, because he had already forgiven. Like he loves them, so there's no even a need to forgive. He was asked for the Father to forgive them, and so you can see how the Christ is a great example of that for us. And then to end, he says, and leaving the offenders to their own inhibitions, he sustained within himself the light of love that dissolves all shadows, inducing us to conquer eternal light. So in that, he gave us a great example, and the example stands until today, more than almost 2,000 years ago. So we can say how powerful that example is, because until today, we are talking about it. So now, how about us?
Yay.
I've got 2 pictures of dogs. How about us, right? And it can be an internal reflection if you want. But if we start to think about forgiveness and start to reflect about a relationship that we have with someone that is perhaps a tough one, be a family member or a friend or a partner. And that relationship is struggling, right? It's a bit of a tough relationship. Thinking to ourselves, how can forgiveness benefit that relationship? Which aspect is forgiveness calling me to work on in that relationship?
One thing you mentioned the prison.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that once I decided to go through a process of forgiveness, and I had this dream that was so strong, and it really changed the way I saw things. I was in a prison, and in this story, like I was for a long time, and then I decided to break free. And I remember in the dream there was this guard, and I decided, like, I opened the gate and said, don't try to stop me, because I want to break free. And he looked at me and said, but you were never a prisoner. There's nothing against you. You were in prison, but you could have left any time. I was like, that's it? And I've stayed so long here. Why didn't I do that earlier? So I always have that in my mind, like, how long do I want to stay in prison? Because I don't need. But we seem to forget that all the time.
It's a self-inflicted prison, right? It's a prison that we created for ourselves. Thank you. It's awesome.
It's for me, since I understand that everyone is in different level of understand the meaning of the evolution here, and I always like to say that is not we are not in a race. So I'm better than him or her, and it's like I'm win that. No one will win or lose the competition, because there is no competition. And since I understand that, even when I think about the obsessions, like, and for me, when I realize that it's different level of understanding of that, is for me, I see things totally differently. And for me right now, when I think someone that did something for me, I just can think that he's in different level. That maybe he or her can arrive faster than me. I don't know, and it's like that's okay, and they will learn by themselves.
Exactly. Thank you, Gabi. It's very interesting to see, because whenever we hold that the grudge, I guess when we hold the grudge against someone, it's only doing bad for us, right? It's holding us back as our shackles, right? But when we decide to forgive, that certainly can heal ourselves. Develop talks a lot about forgiveness. And so, that was just the reflection I wanted to bring. If there is a tough relationship in our lives, we can think about, perhaps we could where can I bring some forgiveness to this relationship that might actually help straighten it up and heal it a little bit.
And if you think just one more comment about it, Victor,
Mhm.
well, you can think about what Jesus said. Just forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. And the second one would be seeing the other person as an immortal spirit, which is also imperfect, the same way as we are. So it's easier, let's say, to forgive the other person, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And this will automatically help us because we are exercising forgiveness. We are evolving in the sense of training our virtues.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Thank
Can
you.
I add
Yes, please.
just one thing that is like I think when you hurt by other person and you put yourself in a victim state, that is like it's not real because it's not victim, and when we realize that it is no difference and it's like you are not a victim and it's like oh, they do this for me because I'm less and I see myself less than the others, and it's like you can see that it's like sometimes do not make sense to put you in this type of states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Gabby. Well, thank you all. And now we're going to look at some examples. Two of Christ's disciples, and talk about forgiveness. The first one is Peter, Simon Peter, who you probably all heard of. And we're going to bring a few passages from this book called The Good News. This one is on chapter 26, so this is right after or during the Last Supper, which again happened around the time of Easter. And if you were to remember, or if you read a little bit about Peter and his personality, he used to be the go-getter. He used to be sometimes the lead in a lot of the journeys that we went through. Now, with that also, he was usually the most strict one, the one that would judge others quite heavily. He was very strict, sometimes very harsh, to the point of saying to people, you don't deserve to come to Christ because you are a criminal, or you did this, or you did that. So he was a very judgmental person. So he had a really difficult time being around people or having relationships with people when they were doing something wrong. In a way, that's interesting because whenever we fall into judgment, that simply means that we're not seeing our own shortcomings, our own faults, and we're simply portraying them onto others and then judging them. So this is kind of like the personality that Peter had, very, very strict. And so in this book on chapter 26, when he's talking to Christ, and I'm going to actually read a passage so I say it correctly. Hopefully I can find it. Oh, right, yeah. So this is again at the Last Supper. I don't know if you remember, but during the Last Supper, there's that passage where Christ goes and washes the feet of the apostles, right? When he gets to Peter, Peter says, he says, "You will never wash my feet." He tells that to Jesus. And he says, he looks around to all the apostles who let Christ wash their feet. He says, "How dare you let the Christ wash your feet? You're being ungrateful to Christ by letting him practice this." And then Christ looked at him and said, "Simon, do not want to be better than your brothers, apostles, in any way. Just accept what I'm trying to do with you, and in doing so, in humbling yourself, that's when you'll find my love." And then finally Simon allowed Jesus to wash his feet, and then they started talking again, and Christ said, "Peter, your restlessness to become the creditor of new teachings. So your anxiety, in a way, to get to new teachings. He says the experience will teach you better conclusions. So not necessarily, so moving away from the judgment and deciding how people should behave. He said the experience that you go through will teach you a lot more. Because truly I tell you that tonight the rooster will not crow until you have denied me 3 times. So again, this is another famous passage from the Gospel where Jesus tells Peter that you will deny me 3 times, and then a rooster will crow, or un gallo vai cantar. So, and when Peter hears that, Jesus is saying that he will deny Jesus 3 times, Peter gets angry and says, how dare you judge me, thinking, how weak do you think I am that I will actually deny you? And then and then Jesus said sweetly to him, he said, I don't consider you ungrateful or indifferent to my teachings just because you deny me. Peter learned that people are more fragile, people are more ignorant than they are perverse or wicked. This is a very famous passage from this book. It's talking about how we are a lot more ignorant than evil. Whenever we do something bad, it comes to what Carol and Elisa were talking about, and you, the fact that when we do something wrong, most of the time it's not because we're evil, but it's because we're fragile, or it's because we're ignorant. We don't know it better, right? So it's not necessarily that we're trying to hurt someone, but there is an ignorance there that's driving us to act that way. And that's something that Peter couldn't comprehend, right? Because he was always, it's black and white. You did something wrong, you deserve no mercy, and you must be judged in a way. So then, this was the Last Supper, and then Christ, if you remember, there's that whole passage where the guards find Christ because Judas told where he was, and then they take Christ. And then once the guards got Christ, they also walked around to find everyone who was a disciple of Christ and bring them to prison as well. And in that moment, that's where one guard sees Peter and says, hey, that's one of Christ's apostles. And then Peter says, no, I'm not. So that was his first denial of Christ. And that happens a second time. And then Peter starts thinking, he's starting to feel bad because he's saying no, that he's not an apostle of Christ. But then at the same time, he starts thinking of prison and how he didn't want to go to prison, and starts thinking about his family. The downside of saying yes. And then another guard comes and tries to flag him as an apostle, and he denies Christ the 3rd time. And that's when the rooster crows, or gallo canta, and then he realizes that he had, denied Christ 3 times. And in that moment, he hears again what Christ had told him, that Peter, people are more fragile than wicked or than perverse. Because in that moment, he fell into a deep judgment and a deep guilt for having done what he did. And even though he heard Christ's forgiveness in a way, telling him to forgive himself because people, again, are more fragile than wicked. And then the book goes on to say that he's struck by unspeakable remorse, and the apostle withdrew from the crowd and started crying. And he said, the book says, he, Peter, who had always been very harsh and a resolute man, who had condemned invariably those who led astray from truth and good, who never managed to forgive the most unhappy women, there he was, downcast like a child, in the face of his own shortcomings. And then he finally began to understand the shortcomings of others. So when he was finally able to see his shortcomings, or his flaws, he was finally able to forgive the ones from others. So that draws a little bit into the fact that you two were talking as well, is the idea of going within. seeing our own shortcomings, and then realize that there is no room for us to judge others because we have our own. Right? And that was how Peter was able to finally forgive others of what he had done. So that was an example of Peter. And now we're going to the example of Judas. And that was the second apostle, where we can learn a lot from. So Judas, there is again a passage here in chapter 24, so right before the Last Supper. And I like this passage because it helps us understand a little bit why Judas did what he did. And I'll read off the book here. This is a talk that Judas was having with James. James's name in Portuguese is Tiago. And then Judas is talking to James, and Judas is saying, "Don't you think the master is too simple and too good to break the tyranny of the kingdom that we have nowadays? Don't you think he's just too good, too simple to break free from this tyranny that weighs on Israel and abolish slavery and oppress other people?" And then James replied, "Well, do you think the master could have the disposition of a destructive warrior? Do you think that's what Christ is supposed to be, a warrior that's going to fight?" And then Judas replied, "Well, not that much. I don't think he should be a destructive warrior, but at the same time, I have the impression that the Messiah does not consider opportunities even today." He said, "I had the attention demanded by the doctors of the law, who made me feel the uselessness of evangelical preaching, always carried out among the most ignorant and disqualified." So here he was criticizing Christ for focusing his teachings on the ones who are ignorant and disqualified, because Christ was always preaching to those who are ignorant and disqualified. And Judas was questioning, why was Christ doing that? He shouldn't be focusing on the ignorant, on the disqualified. He should be out there telling these to the leaders, to the high ranking officials and guards. And then James responded, "The Messiah, however, comes to carry out the true revolution, building his kingdom over hearts and souls." Okay, so James was trying to bring Judas back to the purpose of Christ. And then Judas didn't really like what James said, and finally said, "I do not agree with the principles of inaction, and I believe that the gospel can only win the support of Caesar's representatives or the administrative authorities of Jerusalem who govern our destiny." So here you can start to see why Judas was trying to get Christ within the rankings of the Roman hierarchy. So his plan was to, he's going to tell the guards where Jesus is, then he's going to befriend the Romans, and then he's going to crawl up through the chains, and then bring Christ into to the hierarchies of Caesar's representatives. And then when he's high up, then he'll have a voice, a big voice, and then he'll be able to bring a revolution and bring his teachings to everyone. This was, in a sense, what was his plan, what was in his mind. And that's why he did what he did. Right? And he was the one who told the guards where Christ was, and who eventually led Christ to be crucified, as we usually know. So, when we heard about Peter, Peter also had an issue, not an issue, but a disappointment with Christ when he denied Christ. And Peter fell into guilt, but he was able to come out of it through the forgiveness of Christ, and he actually became a solid rock for Christianity afterwards. Instead of being the judgmental person that he was, he then became this a very rock solid. He was very sure about Christ's teachings. He was very stern, but at the same time he was very compassionate. To the point that he was able to, especially during the times of Paul, when Paul and Jack and James again weren't getting along, Peter was the one who was helping the relationship. So he changed quite a bit. Whereas Judas, when Judas realized what he did, he also fell into guilt. But instead of repenting and moving forward, he committed suicide. He couldn't live with that guilt. And if you remember when Christ then was resurrected during Easter, when he resurrected during Easter, the first one that he appeared to was Mary, right? And if you remember in that passage, Jesus didn't touch Mary because he said that he'd been to, I'm not going to remember the words, but he'd been to the underworld in a way. So now, this is not the book, but through the mediumship of Givaldo Franco and the spirit called Amelia Rodriguez, there's a book called Wheat of God, where Amelia describes what happened to Christ after he passed, right? And then he says that, so Christ, before appearing to the woman who went to the empty tomb, so Mary, before Christ appeared to Mary, Jesus had descended into the painful regions of the underworld, into which Judas was suffering the torment and the obsessors that influenced him to the tragedy. So Judas was suffering after he committed suicide, and he was being tormented by himself and also all the obsessors that influenced him to commit the suicide. And then, all of a sudden, they say, in the unique days, without being able to see the divine friends, so Jesus had gone all the way down to Judas, Judas momentarily felt his pain and madness lessen, and he heard his sweet voice in the furrows of his being. Judas, it is I. Trust and wait, there is still time. None of my sheep will be lost. Forgive yourself for the outrage so that you can free yourself from guilt and recover. So these are words from Christ when he said, forgive yourself for the outrage so that you can set yourself free from guilt and recover.
I was thinking about that, I think it was this week that I was listening to one of those lectures, and then I remembered, I don't know if other people from other parts of Brazil had this memory like of Sábado de Aleluia or the Holy Weekend, but I remember that the highlight growing up for me was when we burned Judas. So I was thinking like, oh, where does that come from? It was really as a child we would try like in the highway, in the road, to buy those made out of like rags or old clothes. You buy like a espantado, I forgot, that you call Judas, and you hang it there like on Holy Good Friday, and then you wait for Saturday and you burn it, and we would make, or the adults would like make those little piece of paper saying what they would leave, Judas would leave to each one. For Juliana, I will leave this, and then you burn it. And then you're just clapping and celebrating that. And then like, I was Christian or Catholic. I was born Catholic, but then I think is the forgiveness or the understanding, because we're here talking as Spiritists. How does Catholicism approaches that? Because this is just common sense. That's what we did every year. Like the Easter egg, and that would be some celebration around that. But burning Judas, and this is so mean. And like you teach kids to condemn, and it was like Judas is bad because he betrayed Christ. That's how I grew up, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting because, so yeah, you're talking about condemning Judas when the last words from Christ, a few minutes before was about forgiveness. So forgive, and the first thing is to condemn, right? So You can see how our memory is very, very short. Christ told us to forgive. When we see what Judas did, the first thing we do is to condemn. So,
And his example too, right? Because he was hanging there, physically suffering, not right. And I know that his mother Maria, she came and to like help him, and he asked her to go see Judas, right? Says no, please go see Judas. So he sent her mother to go there and help who betrayed him.
yeah, exactly.
And after he passed,
That's
Judas
where he
was the
goes.
first person that he went to see to help him to forgive himself, because Jesus has forgiven him already. So doesn't make any sense. What people used
Is that
to
only
do.
me, or did you guys have
No, I
that
remember
too?
that, but I don't think this happened anymore. I don't know. I don't think this happened anymore, right? But this is definitely like an example of forgiveness, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. It's amazing to see when Jesus goes down to the person who betrayed him and asks him to forgive himself. Jesus again didn't need to forgive Judas because he loved Judas. So he was down there telling Judas, please forgive yourself, because that is going to set you free. The guilt can be very detrimental to ourselves. It can be that prison that we talked about, and the shackles that keeps us. I put this picture here because it could be us asking Christ to forgive us for something, but Christ has already forgiven us. The forgiveness is ourselves with ourselves. It's us forgiving what we did, so we can free ourselves from the guilt.
Can I
Yes,
ask
please.
just something I want to raise? I think forgiveness, I think it's a hard feeling to like, it's a hard action to do. Like, I don't really understand it, I think, because, when is it you're brushing something off or you're just doing something superficial? No, like, yes, I forgave that person, or I forgave myself, versus, what does it actually mean? I think it's not very tangible,
It's a tough one. One of the things that Alita says is you forgive, you can tell that you forgive him when you think about what happened and it doesn't hurt anymore. That's, I guess, one of the things that we can use as a measurement.
And I think the other thing too is like, if you, like, it's an ongoing, it's a process, right? You're never free of, like, I think, or you never forgive everything or everyone. But what I try to tell myself is like, if you can't forgive out of selflessness, forgive because you're selfish. Forgive because of you. Try to forgive because it's better for you.
Nice.
It's not like the other person doesn't deserve. It's just, I will forgive, it's better for me. So then you work harder because it's better for you.
Yeah.
Another thing I heard is, if you're not prepared yet to forgive, at least accept. Accept that things were the way they were, and you can change it. It's already a start, so you're not constantly battling against it.
I guess we have to also remember about time, because sometimes we can get anxious because we're like, oh my God, I have to forgive. And then it's, as you guys said, it's a process. So sometimes you're not ready to forgive right away, but you're in that, you have a target, let's say, right? That you want to forget, you're doing your exercise, your efforts to forgive at some point.
Good point.
Thank you.
I hear that a lot. I forgive, but I don't forget. I will never forget what so-and-so did to me. So what is the forgiveness there? Just like...
Is it possible?
It's not, yes.
Is it possible?
Yes. Well, that's the beauty of forgiveness, is that you don't have to forget what happened, but you can think about what happened and it
But
doesn't
just
hurt
get hurt
you. Yeah, exactly.
Forget, you're never gonna forget, because you have a brain, you have a memory.
And if you're trying to, if the focus is forgetting,
You don't,
you're
anger, you don't get the grudge against that person.
Yeah, but if your focus is forgetting, then it's just I'm trying to find the word. That's just sweeping it under the rug, right? You're not working through it. You're just pushing it down.
Such an amnesia instead of forgiveness.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So
you need to be aware of what happened and still remember.
Exactly.
But go beyond that and actually not have hard feelings anymore about that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, swipe under the rug and just put a stone over it.
And being very accepting and compassionate with ourselves, because if the thing is pretty recent, we might have to do that. We might have
you might have to forget first.
Forget a little bit, and then slowly pick at it. Right? It's not a flip of a switch. It's not going to happen over time. Right?
It might be a little selfish, but what helps me at least start this process is understanding that you can't get away from your hardness. Like whatever you do bad, at some point it comes to you as a learning. So it's more for me understanding that I am not to judge, because there is already life, there is God who will decide what and when. So it's not up to me. It's not like forgiving, like, oh, I hope he's okay. No, I don't want the person to be okay. One thing I heard that really helped me is I hope that everyone receives what they need to grow. That's it. And it's not up to me to judge. So it's switching from I am not one who decides perspective.
And maybe whatever happened to you that the other person has done with you,
you need it too.
Yeah, you need it too. And that person was only the, how can I say that in English?
The messenger or the...
No, the
enabler?
Yeah, like the person that was the vehicle, like, that God used it to teach you something.
Exactly. So if you see from the perspective of growing, and that there is something that is not us that decides what we need to go, then it's easier. That's why I love so much Spiritist, because it makes sense. For me, I cannot forgive something if I don't understand. I need to understand. And when it makes sense, I'm like, okay, it's a learning process. And I'm good with it.
But we're so selfish that we only look from our perspective too, right? Maybe you have inflicted something on the other to get what you got. And you forget that.
Need forgiveness too.
And you forget that actually incurred or inflicted something that actually caused what you're suffering.
Yeah.
And you're just here to blame the other, not blame yourself for what you did, and you got it back. So if you ask the two sides of the story, each side has a different perspective, right? They're always right, both of them. My dad used to say that there are three sides of the story: yours, the other, and the right one.
Which is a blend of the two, right? Absolutely.
And I think, when you forgive, when the past is in the past, it's just like it doesn't affect you anymore now. So it's just, yes, it happens. And
it shouldn't, right?
It's just a fact.
Yeah, it's...
As I had lasagna for dinner yesterday, like something that is exactly in the past, and it's not like reenacting or reoccurring every time you think about that.
Yes, we say that the past is a place for reference, but not a place for residence, right? You never live in the past. We use it as a reference. You never live there. Right?
Thank you. And so just to finish off, I guess, what the conversation between Christ and Judas, after he said, free yourself from guilt and recover. I said, light the lamp of hope, and the shadow will give away. Remember love, so that peace may nestle in your heart. I will never leave you, nor will I ever condemn you. Today the new season begins, and tomorrow is Victory Day. Rest a little, because the millennia await you, and I will always be waiting for you. That eased the suffer of Judas, and then he went into sleep to recover for a little bit. And then he had multiple reincarnations. The last one we know of was Joanna d'Arc, which is where he was able to fully repent and regenerate from what he had done.
Judas?
Christ. Yes.
Oh, okay.
John.
Joan of Arc?
Joan of
Arc.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Now, the other thing about Easter is that it also marks the beginning of spring. Unlike what you see outside. Unlike what you see outside.
Where is it?
Yes, in some countries. We're a little delayed. But the idea, right, is what Luciana was talking about from before, right? It's and what spring brings to us is that new beginning, right? Rebirth, the new beginning. And then we can think about every time we forgive a little bit, or every time we help someone, every time we do any sort of virtuous act, right? You help someone, you say a consoling word, or you forgive. It's like a flower blossoming within ourselves, because we have all of the virtues as seeds, and every time we practice it, it's a little flower that's blossoming there, and eventually it'll become a beautiful tree. Just remember, be patient with ourselves. That every time we do something good, that is creating that little flower. And last, but not least, so I just wanted to end with the reflection how the freedom that Jesus brought us. So we talked about how the freedom that he brought us was the lesson of forgiveness, right? And now to kind of close it off, if we were to compare Easter from not before, but how the Jews celebrate Easter, or the reason, and how we celebrate Easter for ourselves here in Christianity. If we were to think the celebration that we have with Jews, they are celebrating the freedom from an oppressor that was material, that was physical, like it was slavery, it was physical slavery, and that's what Easter is representing. The Easter that Jesus brought can also be thought about freeing ourselves from an oppressor that's pretty big, and it's an oppressor that is not out there. It's an oppressor that's actually within us, and it's an oppressor that is called pride, and all its sons and daughters, selfishness, vanity, the ego, and the pride, the arrogance, and so on and so forth. So these are greed. These are the oppressors that Jesus is freeing us from, right? Whenever we reflect upon his lessons, you can always see a tool or a way to free ourselves a little bit from our pride, from our vanity, and so on and so forth. So that's, I guess, the exodus, or the freedom that Christ is inspiring us to do with his message and with his life. And that's it. Thank you all. Really good reflections. I appreciate your help. Right? It's really good. And right?
Gives the sensation of freedom.
Freedom, right? Yeah. And it's perfect. So now we have our pass. All right, we're going to do a fine prayer. We have the passes back here, and then we'll rearrange for lunch. So it's getting closer. So let us close our eyes. And let's try to hear Christ telling us that people are way more fragile and ignorant than perverse. Let us hear Christ telling us to forgive ourselves so we can be free, so we can free ourselves from our guilt. And in doing so, remember that Christ always tells us that he does not condemn us. Christ, may we be able to experience the freedom that you came to show us. May we be able to practice
forgiveness in our daily lives, not out of necessity or burden, but because of the freedom that it brings us, the weights that He lifts from our shoulders, and the love that blossoms from it. May we find the beautiful flower blossoming in our hearts every time we elevate our thoughts into You and ask for Your help. May You bless us with Your light, Your love, and peace forever and ever. So be it.